Cherokee removal. Was it inevitable? What exactly happened? Why did it happen? What does the time period have anything to do with the actual event? Let's find out. All sorts of factors came into play in this time period.
Immigration was a big deal at this time. The total population of people in Mississippi and Alabama around 1810 was about 40,000, but in 1830, the population had exploded to 445,000 people.
Come on, old man, we gotta get some land. Woo! Move on. Along with the humongous population increases, Henry Clay's American system was brought along about this time by
dear old John Quincy Adams himself. Yay for the 6th president.
Cherokees also held some of the most prime cotton land in the southern United States at that time. If you look at the map, there's Cherokee lands in northern Georgia stretching into northern Alabama, which is right in that cotton belt region. Perfect. Settlers were going to get it one way or another. There was also a gold rush in 1821 in Cherokee country, so that didn't help matters any at all either. Wait a second. Gold rush in Georgia, 1821? Huh? What about California? 49ers? That's where the gold's at. Gold! Gold! I found gold! In Georgia! So in the early 1800s, there was this whole civilization policy that the United States government thought would be a great idea to bring natives into society. They could work to become citizens of the United States. So since civilization policy generally failed, that meant something new had to come along. So around about the 1830s, 1840s, a new idea kind of came about that it was more of a biological view on race overall. It was originally thought with the whole civilization policy that natives would become better citizens and more moral if they were surrounded by the civilization policy, if they were surrounded by stuff of European grandeur. That was kind of the environmentalism belief, that if you put somebody in an environment, then you can change that person's character. When things didn't work quite as the way the Americans thought it would work out, things started to change. This new thought was biology shapes who you are. If you got bad blood, you're going to stay that way. Doesn't matter if we surround you with the best. Doesn't matter if you say you got religion. Doesn't matter if you went to school. You're still bloody Injun. You're no good. Now this was a scientific thought, and it was actually proven, supposedly proven, through phrenology, which was a new thought that was coming around at that time, at the 1830s-ish, where it was a bad psychology ideas. It was a pseudoscience that was supposed to say that if you could measure a person's skull, then you can determine what their personality traits are and what kind of talents they have. Exactly 23 inches. Most definitely a mathematician, and most definitely an extrovert. Oh yeah, that's definitely right on. Not! Oh yeah, I'm a doctor, because all doctors have mustaches. Yeah.
Samuel Morton, a so-called scientist at the time, wrote a book and published it in 1839 called Crania Americanica that kind of supposedly proved this whole idea.
So, different races are different species. So, African Americans, they're not human. They're not European, so therefore they're not human. They're a different species from us. So, that allowed a racial hierarchy to form. And I bet you can guess who's at the top of the heap.
In 1828, Andrew Jackson was elected as president, and he was from Tennessee and claimed to be a backwoods fighter that would fight for the frontier and the common man. Jackson had strong support from the South, so he would obviously, and he did, fight for states' rights for those backwoods people, which included kicking the Cherokees and other Native Americans off of their lands and moving them to the lands in the West.
So in 1802, Georgia decides to cede its post-Revolutionary War claims of its state. Originally, it claimed that it owned land all the way to west to the Mississippi River. But in 1802, they decided that no, we'll give those back to the federal government in exchange for a promise that the federal government will remove all Indian tribes within the new boundaries of the state of Georgia in a reasonable amount of time. That meant that Georgia kind of expected that eventually the Cherokees and the Creeks and others would be moved out in a reasonable amount of time. By 1830, it still hadn't happened. Georgia got mad and decided to take it upon themselves to kick the Indians out one way or another. We can't kick them out? Okay, we'll get them out there. We'll make life like hell for them. How are they going to do this? Well, there are lots of ridiculous laws passed by the Georgia General Assembly that were meant to make it difficult for whites, particularly missionaries and traders, to get in and out of Cherokee country, and it also made just life pretty darn miserable for Cherokees living within the country. Laws like, you must obtain a certificate in order to be in Cherokee country anyways. The Georgia General Assembly decided to form what was called the Georgia Guard, which was a paramilitary group that was set up to patrol the Cherokee Nation and enforce Georgia laws upon Cherokees within their own nation. This led to some good old Supreme Court cases that everyone needs to know. In the case of the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in this year of 1831, the Cherokees argued that they are a foreign nation and should be treated as so. We, the Supreme Court, have decided that the Cherokees are a domestic dependent nation living within the state of Georgia, not a foreign nation. So in this case, the Cherokees have no legal standing. In Worcester versus Georgia in 1832, Samuel Worcester, an American missionary, had entered into the Cherokee territory and was arrested by the Georgia Guard because he failed to obtain a state license stating that he was allowed in the territory. He and some other missionaries argued to the Supreme Court that the Georgia laws were unconstitutional because they violated the treaties that the United States government had made with the Cherokees. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Worcester and struck down the Georgia laws that were terrorizing the Cherokee people and that were making life very difficult for them. So we of the Supreme Court in 1832, in this case of Worcester versus Georgia, we decide that only the federal government can argue in such cases and only have control over Native rights. What? Are you kidding me? Come on! States' rights! Pfft, like we're gonna believe that. Let's move on. Move him out. John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. The Supreme Court had made the decision, but then the executive did not uphold that decision whatsoever. In 1835, a treaty was signed, the Treaty of New Echota, and this was a treaty signed by a small minority of Cherokees who ceded their lands so that they could move west. They did so just because they were tired of fighting and they did not believe that anything good would come out of it, and they decided to just move west and see what would happen. The federal government, on the other hand, accepted this treaty as agreement from all Cherokees, not just the small faction that gave up their lands.
Initially, only about 2,000 Cherokees moved at about 1835 after the treaty was signed. But then in 1838, General Winfield Scott and 7,000 federal troops came to force the remaining 13,000 Cherokees off and into the west. Unlike most other tribes that were removed, the Cherokees were moved overland, and they were moved during the winter, which seriously hurt their population. About 4,000 of the 13,000 that moved, about 4,000 died. that was more than any other nation that had been removed, and that was about a quarter of the population that was dead.
Burn, Jackson, burn. Ha! Blackader, this is for you. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.